I think we can all relate to this one. It's late at night, and as you sink into the warmth of your bed covers, you reach onto your bedside table. You feel that small plastic slab bringing it towards you as you flip it open, and hear that familiar chime. In 2004, Reggie Fils-Aimé walked onto the stage at E3 to present to the world the Nintendo DS. At the time, the DS was marketed as a third pillar to Nintendo's console lineup. This would make it the DS, the GameCube, and the Game Boy Advance. Yeah, just like how the Switch wasn't meant to replace the 3DS. Not sure why Nintendo thought we'd buy this, considering the DS can play Game Boy Advance games.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
When the DS released in November of 2004 for $150, it was clear this thing was the successor to Nintendo's Game Boy line. Keep in mind, at the time, Nintendo had used the Game Boy name for over 15 years. So this DS was something Nintendo wasn't all too sure of at the time. Needless to say, they had nothing to worry about. The DS was my first console. Not the first I played, but the first console I had all to myself. I remember going to a friend's house one day, and both him and his brother were playing on their DSs. One of them passed the console to me so I could have a go, and bam! I developed a lifelong addiction that has severely affected my bank account and my ability to retain concentration. I don't remember when I got my DS, but I remember walking into a store with my mum as she bought me that early birthday present.
Copy that.
A black DS Lite. She said I could get one game. I remembered back to the game I played at my friend's house a few months before, Mario Kart DS. So without hesitation, I asked my mum for Spider-Man 3. The game sucked, and I don't want to talk about it. This was the first Nintendo handheld to feature plastic game cases, which gave it a premium feel, just like the home consoles. Picking up my first game, which, not sure if you all can relate to this one, but in the land down under, games used to come in these behemoth cases that were almost twice the size of normal games. I know that Europe also had these cases, but I'm not sure if they later also changed them to the normal sized American cases, which Australia later did. One of the many code names for the DS during its development was the Nintendo Nitro. A fun leftover from this name is how on each DS cartridge the serial number starts with an NTR. Another code name was the City Boy. This name was in order to appeal to a younger demographic. Somehow, a few weeks later my birthday rolled around, and I was blessed with a copy of Mario Kart DS. This game was more common than the Plague, but unlike the Plague, this one had Luigi. One of the most beloved Mario Kart games. It was the first time you could play a console-quality Mario Kart game on the go. Sorry, Super Circuit.
You guys all think you're so much better than me.
Oh, Meg, that is the least fancy thing I have ever heard.
The game used 3D models for the characters, which was a first for the handheld titles. You could customize your kart, emblem, and use them on the 8 amazing tracks in the game, not to mention the battle modes. This game was full of charm, with its amazing soundtrack, distinct colors, and detailed sprite work. Mario Kart DS was weird in that, depending on what kart you chose, it would affect the item luck that you had. Thankfully, this never returned, because this feature sucked. Some of my most beloved memories come from this game, like all the times I stayed at my friend's beach house. There was no better feeling than rolling a blue shell and sending it up to my friend who was sitting in another room, hearing them yell across the house.
God damn it!
We'd play into the latest hours of the night, dubbing the winner of each cup the reigning Drift King. This is also a perfect transition into one of the DS's best features, Download Play. This feature allowed you to play multiplayer with your friends only if one of you owned the game. This would often come with some caveats though, longer load times and locked content for example, but mostly it just let other people know that you were Povo for not owning the game, such as in Mario Kart where players who didn't own the cartridge would be locked into playing Shy Guy. Another upgrade from the Game Boy was the wireless multiplayer, no longer requiring cables. One of my favourite games to play with friends was easily Mario Party DS. This is by far my favourite Mario Party, and that is totally, not at all, entirely, definitely 100% bias. Many of the minigames took advantage of each player having their own screen, such as in Camera Shy, where each player had to traverse a maze and find each other and snap a photo in order to win. The game took advantage of so many of the DS's features, dual screens, microphones, and the touchscreen. This console sold so well, and that's primarily because of how appealing it was to casuals. I mentioned the touchscreen brought a lot of people in. Games like Nintendogs and Brain Age were under the umbrella of touch generation games. These were titles on the DS that were meant to appeal to a more casual and mature audience, and they really did.
Here I come.
The DS came out in a time where touchscreen devices were in their infancy. Typically, they were unresponsive and inaccurate, but the DS was the first time I remember using a touchscreen and it feeling like a one-to-one feedback. The DS also came with a stylus to make it easier, of which many of these stylus were lost to the fiery flames of Mount Doom, never to be seen again. The feature was such a selling point for the console that it was a key part of its marketing for some time, with the tagline, "Touching is good." Yeah, I'm not kidding. Check out this advertisement from back in the day.
starts a conversation like that? I just sat down.
The marketing of the DS was strange. At first it started out kind of like the PS3 with these mysterious, futuristic and dystopian ads. Then it was more upbeat ads with older people and teenagers, and then ads with Beyonce. Do you actually think she ever played this thing outside of the ad? It seemed like everywhere you went, schools, airports, malls, even the peaks of Mount Everest, you would see a DS. That's not a joke either. Mountain climbers Neil Mueller and Chris Grubb took their DSs along with them on the trek up Mount Everest, and among all of the electronics that they took with them, the DSs were some of the only ones that didn't break. Black, pink, and light blue were the most common colors that I saw, but there was one that I never remember seeing. The DS had two main revisions. The one most people are familiar with is the DS Lite. Released in 2006, the DS Lite had a sleeker design, brighter screen and longer battery life, and a larger stylus, which still didn't help it from getting lost. But the DS came out in 2004. Yes, well, the original DS model looked like this. It's definitely got character. Look, I really like this design. It's very early 2000s. Reminds me of a futuristic panini press. This thing was huge. I wouldn't be surprised if a few people got pulled over at airport security thinking that this thing was a bomb. I did own this model. I picked it up a few years ago. But during the heyday of the DS, I didn't know a single soul who owned one. Hell, I saw the special Mario DS tens of times without ever seeing this thing. There was also the DSi, but I feel like this was more of its own console and less of a revision. It added a camera, a proper home menu, a shop. I feel like this was more of its own console. Just a quick side note, were the black DSs just built worse? All of my friends who had a black DS broke it at some point, including me. My top screen just wouldn't work at certain angles after a few years, which resulted in me eventually being given a light blue as a replacement gift. The power of the DS isn't anything insane today, but at the time, the 3D graphics were amazing. One of the biggest showcases for the DS was Super Mario 64 DS. This launch title was the first 3D Mario that could be played on the go, showing off how the Nintendo 64 classic could be remade and look even better than the original on a handheld. Whilst not as beloved as the original, the remake added 3 new playable characters, Yoshi, Luigi, and Wario. Each had unique abilities that really changed up how the games played. It also included a PvP multiplayer mode and minigames that could also be played with friends. However, the D-pad being used to control the game kinda reeks. Because the D-pad only really has 8 movements you can make, the game wasn't as smooth as the original. The DS was home to so many of Nintendo's greatest franchises. For example, it introduced me to Zelda, Kirby, Animal Crossing, the Mario and Luigi games, WarioWare, and Metroid. And the third-party support on this thing was crazy. Sonic the Hedgehog, Phoenix Wright, Castlevania, the Lego games, Grand Theft Auto, even Call of Duty was on this thing. Don't try it though.
Oh my God. What is that?
I don't know.
Speaking of first introductions, this was my first Zelda game that I played. The Phantom Hourglass. I think I played it for maybe an hour and then never played it again. I just never felt like I was in control of Link. I felt with the stylus controls, I was more just pointing him where to go. Not a bad game by any means, but if you're looking for an introduction to Zelda, I wouldn't recommend this one. But I would be doing myself and a large amount of people a disservice if I neglected to mention the R4 cart. Now, I have never and would never dream of pirating a game, let alone hundreds, but on one fateful day, I just so happened to go to a friend's house. With my DS in hand, I slipped, causing me to fall towards the floor, laying on which was an R4 cartridge that happened to lodge itself directly into the empty slot of my DS. As is evident by this 100% accurate retelling, this was completely out of my control. The R4 in R4 stood for Revolution 4 DS. It allowed for ROMs and Homebrew to be booted from a micro SD card that was inside of the cartridge. For me and many others, it came with over 100 pre-installed games. These things were so rampant that the level of piracy is unimaginable. One of the DS's best-selling games was Pokemon Platinum, which sold around 2.7 million copies in Japan, and was illegally downloaded around 2.1 million times. Needless to say, the Big N was not all too pleased. The portability of the DS is unmatched. Sony's competitor, the PSP, was far larger and used discs, which made carting it around a lot more difficult, whereas the DS could just fit right in your pocket. One of the more unique additions to the DS was PictoChat. The application allowed you to send messages to chat rooms of people near you. Long car rides were made infinitely more competitive after an intense game of Mario Kart. You can join a chat room and talk trash and draw messages while your only friend that has Mario Party boots it up and starts another lobby. The portable nature of the DS made RPGs a perfect fit, as their long nature made it so you could pick up and play at any time, and maybe just clock in another 5 minutes of progress. There were plenty of RPG games on the DS. The Mario & Luigi series, which is my personal favourite, Golden Sun, Chrono Trigger, and, of course, Pokemon. Now, I must admit, I'm not an RPG fan, and I am not a very big Pokemon fan. The only one I've ever gotten halfway through was Emerald, so I'm not even remotely equipped to talk about these games. So I won't. But from what I've seen and heard, the DS was home to some of the greatest entries in the franchise. Pokemon Black and White, Hard Gold, and Soul Silver are some of the ones I've heard been really good. As I mentioned just before, Mario & Luigi, specifically Bowser's Inside Story, is my favourite RPG of all time. These games are known for their endless charm and unique art style. I remember being given this game just before a family dinner. With no other kids around, I sat playing this game and was hooked. It took me 46 hours to beat this, according to my save file. Mostly because I got lost and couldn't find where to go, so I didn't play the game for several years, only to return and realize I was about 5 minutes away from the final boss battle. As you might be able to tell, Mario was the main feature on my DS screen. New Super Mario Bros. Still remains one of the greatest 2D platformers of all time. It had been over half a decade since an original 2D Mario was released, and it revived not only the 2D Mario series, but sparked a long missing interest in 2D platformers. The DS was both my and many others' first introduction to video games, and what an introduction it was. Platformers, races, RPGs, party games, story, puzzle solving, this thing had it all. I reckon in a few years we're going to see a heavy price increase in the resale value of DS consoles and games as more people remember the good times they spent on this thing. Even though the Switch is portable, it doesn't really have the same feel as a DS. The DS was a solely portable console, while the Switch is like a home console that you can take on the go. The DS felt like a social system with PictoChat and download play. It let you, with your friends or anyone you met, play games together instantly. I think that's why it's remembered so fondly. You could play with anyone at any time with no barriers to entry. All you needed was a DS. You didn't even need to own the same game. With over 152 million sold, the console remains a historical landmark in Nintendo's history. Makes you think, maybe the two-screen thing is a massive deal maker. I mean, surely if you sell another console with two screens, it'll sell just as well. Oh.
Just waking up in the morning, gotta thank God. I don't know, but today seems kinda odd. No barking from the dog, no smoke. And mama cooked the breakfast with no thought. Bye-bye.